Hey, Kate, it's great to have you on the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
So, I'm going to get right into it because we're in an exciting time. Everywhere I look, people are talking about AI. I feel like I went to sleep in 2022, I woke up in 2023, and the world has gone crazy about AI. So, as a starting point, because there's so much noise going on, what's happening in the world of digital and AI at the moment?
Yeah, so look, I think this is one of the most interesting times to frankly be alive in this space right now. And I think you're absolutely spot on that it feels like the pace of change has never been so quick in this. And I think what's going on is, the world is maybe not waking up, but certainly embracing technology, AI, and so on at a very different level to what we've, ever seen previously. And part of that is because it's become so usable. It's become so wired into our everyday lives, whether that's anything from checking the weather in the morning to
Yes.
ordering a taxi through to dealing with our own bank accounts. It just is the way that we exist. And I think particularly what generative AI and things like Chat GPT and so on have done is they've put this incredibly powerful technology in the hands of people that don't know how to code, that maybe didn't have any kind of technology background, but can suddenly use it for all manner of things that just make life easier, better, faster than it's been so far. So very, very exciting time.
Is it fair to say that we've always been using AI, but only recently have we realized the sort of scale and impact of AI because of ChatGPT, or has it just happened overnight?
No, I think we've been using this for, well, we have been using this for a long period of time. And in some ways, the level of buzz, the level of hype around ChatGPT has sort of thrust it into the mainstream. But this isn't new. AI has existed for a long time in this kind of space. So no, not new, but certainly has garnered a level of platform that perhaps did not exist before the start of this year.
If I'm a CEO, right, I've got 10,000 things on my plate, from climate change to diversity and equity and inclusion. And now my team is telling me I've got to focus on AI. So, as a starting point, seeing what's happening, how should management think about what's happening in AI?
Yeah, I love that question. So I think there are a couple of things I would highlight, right? First and foremost, it's never about technology for technology's sake, whether that's
Yes.
AI, before with blockchain, with quantum computing. It's never about just falling in love with the technology. It's always about what that technology will unlock in terms of value creation potential for your business. Let's say if we are talking about CEOs, and so the first and probably most important thing is, can you get your top team pointed in the right direction in terms of where and how AI is going to create value for your business? So, one of the mistakes that I think lots of people often make is they sort of jump headlong into just getting on and doing stuff, and they
Yes.
shortchange the need to really understand, and be clear about where is it you're trying to go and what's a real roadmap to get there and how much value and in what ways is AI going to change our business. And rather, unfortunately, we see a lot of people just sort of dive in and miss the bigger picture around this.
So, at times, I'm going to paraphrase things for the audience so they can follow the interesting insights you're putting forward.
Of
So, if I
course.
hear you correctly, you're saying that AI is a tool that supports the business and its strategy. And the starting point is to understand where the business is going and then how AI can enable that. Is that a good way to think about it?
I really like that. And look, I'm not a fan of what's my AI strategy. As a business, you
Yes.
have a strategy. AI is just, as you say, the tool or the enabler or the means to the end of achieving that strategy. It is not something that is separate and off the side and treated discreetly. And I think that is unfortunately something that many companies miss, perhaps in the well-intended effort of just trying to rush to take action and rush to make progress.
Now, one of the things that struck me about your work is I like the way you phrased the questioning, which is we've gone through different types of transformations or upheavals in the space of digital over the last 30 years. So we do have an established playbook in terms of how we think about this and respond. So why is it so many companies seem to be always caught like a deer in the headlights when these things happen? What's the reason for the surprise and the apprehension when there is an established way to respond to these things?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and frankly, it's one of the reasons why we've written this book, is because day to day, I see many executives struggling with how to really drive and deliver value from their digital transformations. And as we've kind of pared back and looked at hundreds upon hundreds of transformations, actually the menu, the ingredients are not rocket science, right? If you'll excuse the pun. There is actually quite a simple set of things that need to get done. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. Of course it isn't. If it were, lots and lots of companies would be doing this and sailing off into the sunset. But what it is about being incredibly rigorous around 6 key steps that we believe, really separate out those that are managing to capture value and have fundamentally rewired their business to do so, versus those that are struggling. Maybe it's, they can get onesie-twosie use cases out, but they're not able to do that at scale, or they create a little bit of value, but it's not anywhere close to what they believed the full promise of digital was going to be. And ultimately, they're not outcompeting as a result.
And do you find that there are some sectors that are better at adapting to AI than others, or is it best practice that is not linked to a specific sector, but linked to certain types of management styles or approaches to the way they run their business?
Yeah, so we absolutely, we do see some sectors kind of getting out maybe ahead of others on this. And there's always been a sort of maturity curve approach to this. But what's interesting is the playbook that we posit in the book is industry agnostic, right? There isn't one playbook for banking, another one for life sciences. It genuinely is agnostic. Now, how you apply some of the individual parts of that, of course, are going to have lenses for different sectors. But the point here is there is one way, genuinely one way to do this, writ across sectors. And I think if you'd have asked this question a couple of years ago, we'd have said, certain sectors are well ahead on that maturity curve than others, and the difference between the leaders and the laggards from a sector basis, is big. What you now see is in every, right at the top of the maturity curve and right at the bottom, you can have the same sector. So what's actually happened is those that have got this right are separating, from the pack, as it were, within their sector, rather than, hey, it's banking and it's telco at the top and it's, mining and whatever else at the bottom. That it's less like that anymore. So what we've now seen is the stretch out within a sector rather than just one sector versus another.
So if you were talking to a CEO, as I'm sure you do weekly and daily, someone who's trying to think through these issues, how would you advise them to go about doing it? Assume that it's someone who knows AI and digital is making big changes, but they're not sure what the starting point is. So how do they start to move the organization to respond to this?
Yeah, so one of the first sort of mindset shifts that I would think about in this is almost the difference from doing digital, right? Trying to put a bunch of digital epithets at the start of every other project you have, versus being digital, right? And being digital requires businesses to really rewire how they operate and how they build the sets of capabilities that are going to generate value over time. So the first thing is just to make sure that mindset shift is there. And then, as I talked about earlier, the single most important starting point is getting your top team pointed in the right direction. If I look at someone like a DBS, and this is one of the stories that we tell in the book, their journey began with really taking executives to a whole raft of other tech startups. Interestingly, not other banks, but other tech startups, to figure out what does it take to become the leading digital bank, right? So they didn't want to just compare themselves to their peers, but to say, what's it going to take to step out in our industry? And that journey becomes a lot easier once all of the bank's leadership team understood where exactly they are going. So that strategic roadmap, that first step of the playbook, you really can't get under the skin of any of the other pieces until that is clear. And that, I think, as well, requires any leadership team to have what I call an audacious aspiration around
Yes,
what
I
they're
like
trying
that.
to do. Because this isn't just, can I be incrementally a little bit better, right? Across any industry, certainly that I've spent time in, it takes a real leap of faith to say, no, if I really rethink this, if I really think about where the puck is going, if you like, in terms of value,
Yes.
that requires a jolt. And that's why that sort of audacious aspiration is really key. But it has to be done as a team.
So one of the feelings I got from reading the book is that we're in an age whereby transformation or change is ongoing. You almost need a leadership team that's going to be okay with the fact that this never really ends.
Yeah.
You're always going to have to be on. There's always going to have to be some change going on. You can never set up a business model whereby we're going to say we're going to change it over the next 18 months, and then we're going to take our foot off the accelerator and we're going to reap the rewards for the next 4 or 5 years. Is that a good way to think about it?
Yeah, it really is. And maybe that's the sort of, the slightly arresting part of this book is, we believe that digital transformation is never going to be done.
Yes.
One of the reasons I personally, at least, don't really like the term digital transformation or AI transformation is transformation implies that at some point we will be done, right?
Yes.
We'll all pat each other on the back and say, we are transformed. Well done, us. And that's not how life works in this space.
Yes.
What a real digital transformation does is it builds the muscle memory to keep getting better, to use technology in ever more innovative ways to unlock that value. But none of us has a crystal ball, and who knows what technologies we're going to be talking about in 5 years, 10 years time. But your ability as an organization to be ready for that, to be able to scale against it, to move faster or at a faster metabolic rate, if you like, than your competitor, that's where the real beauty in digital transformation is. So no, sadly, I think you're never quite done.
And in your experience, best practice that you've seen, how do companies manage this always on model without burning out the employees? How do they keep things moving, keeping up with the competition, staying ahead of the curve? How do they do it while treating their workforce in a way where they don't want to all retire after 18 months?
Yeah, it's a super point. And for anyone out there on this podcast who's done one or multiple of these transformations, they are tiring, right? They are tiring. Because you're effectively trying to move the organization at a higher metabolic rate than it has hitherto worked at. And so by its nature, it is somewhat exhausting. But what I would say is, at the core of any digital transformation is a people transformation, right? This is one of the reasons why I don't believe that you can outsource your way to digital excellence. Yes. And so once you know where you're going to this point on the strategic roadmap, you have to be able to get the people to get you there. Some of which is, upgrading of your talent bench, maybe hiring and from outside, maybe reskilling, upskilling, from within. But it is about really understanding how do we create an environment for the best and brightest of our people, by the way, not just technologists, but also the non-technologists, the business people as well. How do I help them to really thrive? And a lot of that early work in a digital transformation is creating that people engine that can self-sustain the ability to move fast. And if you get that part right, I'm not saying, you eliminate burnout completely. We're all just human at the end of the day. But it does mitigate, or it does reduce the risk of doing that, because then you're not trying to just do more with the same people. You're really changing the people, and even the people you are keeping and upskilling, you're equipping them with very different tooling, very different mindset, very different ways of working that will enable them to do more. So you can't just load more and more onto an organization. You have to teach it to have that people transformation as well.
There's one thing I do want to check with you in terms of your perspective on this. I remember many years ago, decades ago, when downloading came out, and the media labels fought those companies, took them to court and so on, and tried to shut them down. I think they succeeded. So initially, traditional businesses fought digital changes. But it seems that today the response has been different. Rather than companies overwhelmingly trying to shut down these businesses, they've been more responsive about thinking about how can we bring it into our business model. Have you also seen that change in the way established businesses are responding towards digital changes?
Absolutely. I think it's very, very well put. And some of it is pattern recognition, right? Of just seeing
Yes.
that closing the door doesn't always work, right?
Yes.
In how to do it. So some of it is definitely pattern recognition. And some of it is, I think, almost as organizations, and maybe this is a more ethereal point, but we're becoming more porous, right? It's not just the confines of my company and how I think about my company. It's actually, how do I work with others? I need, I'm maybe part of an ecosystem. I have many partners that are helping me to do whatever it is that I need to do. I need to work with different data sets. I need to work with folks that maybe are not immediately within my, my definition of my industry, but perhaps are really key players or have control points within my value chain. And so I think as organizations, we've become more porous and therefore more open to thinking about, not just a simple equation of, who's my competitor and who isn't, but, sometimes it's a frenemy and sometimes it's, a collaborator, and very different ways of thinking about it. So, yeah, yes. I think you're absolutely right. There is an openness to that based perhaps on that pattern recognition that just a fully closed door doesn't work.
I was speaking to a senior partner at another consulting firm, and it was an off-the-record conversation. And he was telling me one of the concerns that has been brought forward to him from his more junior team members is the fact that they're being asked to work on AI, but at the same time, employees feel that they're being asked to train a system that's going to be replacing them. And one of his struggles is, how does he manage this? Because to some degree, it is true. These systems are going to replace some employees, while at the same time creating great opportunities for other employees. How do you see other companies dealing with this kind of disconnect or tension? Have you seen it in your work?
Yeah, very, very much so, right? And it's where the traditional fear, right back to the Luddites,
yes.
right? And I apologize, I'm a history major by
I can
by
see
trade.
that, yes.
But what I see is a couple of things. Number one is it's really important to remember that it is about activities changing, not often whole jobs,
Yes.
right? And so actually understanding which are the activities that can be enhanced by AI, for example, and therefore, may give back some time. But what are you going to do with that time? Because it isn't necessarily a whole human and therefore a whole job. And often the companies that I think are really leaning into this are thinking through, well, is there an even better way to deal with that? What would it take me to get to a very different version of the working week that was more inspiring to attract even better talent to my company? Or what would it take to be able to free up the oxygen for that employee to do what only they can do, that might actually be far more energizing to them than otherwise? But there is a reality that I think with certainly when we've updated our research around this, Gen AI on top of AI, is absolutely going to lead to activities changing, and certainly the level of challenge in what the human needs to do within that will change as a result. The other thing that I would say as well is I'm also deeply humanist around this. I'm not in the camp of this technology takes over the world and we're all going to be out of a job and it's sort of Armageddon and so on. I believe that technology at its best makes the human better, right? Technology at its best makes the human better, and so I think what I would encourage and where I see the most forward-leaning companies go is they're trying to think about how to use that technology to create, as we would call it, even within McKinsey, superpowers for our people. Yes. And what's the nature of that? And, we've seen it, of course, with coding. Some of the best coders in the world now talking about getting 70, 80+% of their code through something like a GitHub Copilot. That is an incredible difference in the level of productivity of software engineering, for example. And so I think if you can think about, therefore, what does that human do with that 20% of their time? Wow, that's an incredible gift. So I am a humanist, and I'm also much more excited actually by the productivity benefits that AI will generate than I am about the cost effectiveness of it.
A good parallel for me, anyway, is I was around when digital spreadsheets, Microsoft Excel arrived on the scene. And there was always this thought that it would put analysts out of work, but it actually had the opposite effect. Because It was so easy to use, it allowed more people to get interested in financial modeling, but it allowed us to focus on the most important parts of financial modeling versus doing the things that could be automated away. Is that a good analogy to think about the opportunities that could be created here?
It's a super analogy. And I think if I can take it one stage further, what it then also did is it raised the art of the possible, right? Or made people dream about the art of the possible, about what, how sophisticated modeling could really get. Because we now sort of almost, chuckle a little bit that we were building these things in Excel 10 years ago relative to the power of some of these models today. So I think it absolutely does that. And it creates inquisitiveness about what the art of the possible really could be that drives innovation.
Yes. So let's switch gears a little bit. I want to focus a little bit on macroeconomics here. So we've got a new tool and we've spoken about how it's going to impact companies. But to some degree, we need a workforce that's educated to deal with this. One of the conversations I've seen a little bit about is how we're going to be training university students and high school students to become more equipped to deal with this technology. Now, obviously, that conversation is happening at companies as well. What do you think needs to happen for employees to fully be able to benefit from these changes?
Yeah, wonderful question. So let me take it in a couple of different directions, because in some ways there's the employee piece and there's also what does this really mean for education more broadly, which might be a bigger topic. But if I think about from companies' perspective, not everybody needs to have hands on keyboard, right?
Yes.
And in fact, I think as we go forward, actually, with the push towards low code, no code kind of solutions, I think in some ways fewer people will have hands on keyboard.
Yes.
But what they do need to be able to understand is, they need to understand the nature of how technology can unlock things that they want to be able to do. So they need to be able to ask the right questions, and they need to be able to have a level of curiosity around technology that means that they will play with it. Even just in their own lives, right? That they're technology forward in the things that they try, the way that they do things, and so on. So there's a level of understanding, but there's also a level of participation, personal participation in this world that just means that they're inquisitive and they're learning. And then I think the third thing I would say is, because this is changing so rapidly, one of the things I'm seeing some folks lean into is actually starting to hire people less for skills and expertise and so on, and more for their capacity to learn, right? Call it what you will, learning quotient, right? In the same way as we have EQ and IQ and so on. And that becomes important because none of us really knows what is going to be the next big thing. What we know, though, is we're facing into an unprecedented level of change. And I don't think the world is ever going to get slower than it is today. And so what you want is a workforce that has a capacity, an innate curiosity, the sort of cognitive ability to learn faster than your competitors' organization. And so there are elements like that are becoming just as important as what you teach them. You're teaching them how to learn as well.
I like that. I like the word participation. You don't hear that often, because it's about engaging and being part of the conversation and so on. I think that's a good starting point. So switching gears, in the book, you talk about what to do when great solutions, I think the word is, fails to deliver full value. So I like that, because most books and advisors don't really want to have that conversation. In your experience, what are the best practices in unlocking value?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. It is one of the reasons why we've written this book. Is many execs are struggling with it, right? There's been a wonderful promise of value, Maybe that over the next 5 years, or pick your number, the promise is huge, but capturing that value, really delivering it to the bottom line, has been elusive to date for many, many companies. And so, how do you actually separate out? Well, let me go through maybe another couple of the parts of the book. I've talked already about, okay, you've got to have singular, laser focused line of sight to the where and how value is going to be created, and you've got to be able to, at your core, once you know where you're going, get the people that are going to get you there. There's then a couple of other capabilities that are critical. The first is being able to actually rewire the operating model. We call it agile operating model in the book itself. And this is really the difference between being able to support a handful of teams and hundreds of them, right? And it's often the difference, by the way, between a transformation that fails and one that succeeds, because you've got to be able to create an operating model that can build around products and platforms and provide teams with operational independence to get after what they need to be able to do. And some of this as well is, if you think about it as maybe you've gone on a big journey to hire in some of the best and brightest technical talent. But if that technical talent can't be wildly successful in your organization, well, they're going to leave.
Yes.
And one of the things that we see as a real differentiator between the leaders and the laggards, or those that create the value and those that find it elusive, is that ability to not just hire in, but really think about rewiring, procurement processes so I can spin up new environments fast, or the legal processes that allow you to deal with some of the trickier things around data ethics and responsible product management. Those kinds of topics take a real rewiring of the operating model. So that's the first sort of big difference, big capability. The second, or at least the fourth in our six, is you've got to give the teams the technology that they need in order to innovate. And it's not just about, building proprietary technology. In fact, often far from it. It's actually about building a distributed technology environment where hundreds of teams can access the data, can access applications, software development tools, etc., so that they're able to rapidly deliver, secure, high-quality solutions to the organization. So that the teams have got to have a technology environment that scales, and they've got to be able to make the data consumable. If you like, giving or democratizing that data, available data, so that teams can use it to make better decisions, to trigger better solutions. And I think the core of that as well becomes really, really important. So, we've talked about the need for the roadmap. We've talked about the talent transformation that goes alongside it. And then, of course, it's the next three of agile operating model, the technology, and the data in a federated, democratized way. And then we can come on to the last one in a little while, which is much more around change management, if that helps.
Oh, definitely it will help. But before we get there, you brought up a very important point. We often talk about talent and the need to hire the best, train them, develop them, give them a home, make them feel welcome, and so on. But the area that you focused on, which I liked, is about how do we give them the tools so that they can do the best work? And you spoke about distributed innovation and so on. It would seem to me that you'd need a very flat structure to be able to run something like this. Otherwise, it would die with all the hierarchy. Is that correct in the way I'm thinking about it?
Yeah, and for me, the flatness of the structure is less about the boxes and lines, if you like, and more about the way in which the organization works. And what's critical in this is, are those teams, often, smaller teams of better people, are those teams empowered to work differently? And that's where the flatness, if you like, it comes into its own, because what you need is, a multidisciplinary product teams to be able to move fast enough, because they have, all of the skills readily at hand. They can make decisions. They're empowered to go after, outcomes and key results that the organization is excited by, and it's their job to go make that happen. In a traditionally hierarchical organization, of course, you'd be going back and forth for approvals and running it up the line and, bringing it back down. And it's all of that kind of clag or friction in the system that slows it down. So flatness, yes, but not from a boxes and lines point of view, more from an empowerment and real ability to move quickly because you have everything you need to do so.
Yes, I like the way you explained that. The fact that companies have a traditional way of managing innovation, testing it, putting it out there, getting feedback and so on. And for some companies, that could take months, if not a year, to get approval. How do you manage the fact that you need to be moving faster while still making sure you don't break anything? What's the best practice in terms of getting that right?
Yeah, and the making sure you don't break anything is quite an important part of it for many organizations, right?
Yes.
Particularly if you've got regulatory or other factors at play as well. So how do you move fast? You move fast by really understanding what you need in order to make decisions. And what you find in many organizations is that there's an awful lot of things that get in the way of what actually you needed to make that decision, whether that's, meetings that have 15 people in when actually you only needed one to make that decision, whether it's processes that have multiple steps in them that are really not necessary to be able to move from A to B. And so one of the early parts of any digital transformation is trying to strip back and remove that to make it as simple as possible. And I described it earlier as sort of taking the friction out of the system, right? But it is a really key part of this, because if you do have to go through 25 steps every time you want to approve something, I mean, that talent's just not going to stay because they're used to moving fast. So that's one part. The second is, I'm never a fan of the old sort of Zuckerberg quote of, move fast and break things. No one really likes breaking things. It's not something you particularly aspire to do. But I think what underlined his comment was, we are going to get some stuff wrong, and that's okay. And so what you see in these organizations that are moving fast is they've worked out where they can take risk, and they will, give that airtime to be able to do that. And they've worked out, by the way, where they can't take that risk as well. And so it isn't a one size fits all across the whole organization and a free for all where you can just do whatever, and if anything breaks, who cares? It's not that. It's really getting clinical about, where can we start to move faster and take some risk, and it'll be okay. And it'll be okay because we're going to see it as a learning opportunity. One of my colleagues always used to describe the sort of imperative word within machine learning is learning. It's not machine. And it's always stuck with me as remembering that, because what you're really trying to get to, and how you avoid breaking things you don't want to break, is by instituting a learning loop that's moving faster, right? Faster next week than it was last week, faster in a month's time than it was, yesterday or whatever. That's really the key in this. But it shouldn't be just a straight all out, we can do whatever we can do whatever we want. Because the reality is organizations can't work that way, or many organizations can't work that way. So work out what you care about, where you can start to do things a bit differently, and starts to pull away the process that has, held down organizations over time, and that's frankly just not necessary.
Well, what I like about this conversation is that we've been talking about digital and AI, but the majority of the discussion has been about how the company has to arrange itself and organize itself to be able to make the most of this tool. And I think that sometimes gets lost in the conversation about AI, because everyone talks about the coding, the technology, and the product, but many people tend to forget that you've got to organize your business to be able to exploit this opportunity. And if you fail at that task, then the odds are very high that whatever you do in AI is not going to be as successful as it could be.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's one of the reasons why we settled on the word rewired for this book. Because, this, we talked at the top about, every executive is going to be digitally transforming for, in some ways, the rest of their careers.
Yes, exactly.
It's a journey, right? And this is a very important sort of fundamental part of the book. Is it isn't how do I get done on this? It's how do I go on a journey where, the successful will understand the value that they're going after. They'll understand what capabilities they need to capture that value, and they'll understand how to really change the guts of the organization to ensure that they get it. And I think, that rewiring is really the playbook for how you do that, because everybody not everybody, but many people have a very clear sense of what they're trying to do. The problem and the hard bit is in the how. And that's what we're trying to answer with this playbook.
I want to switch gears a little bit just for the audience because there's so much noise around the subject. What is AI and what's generative AI? What's the difference?
Yeah, great question. So really, AI as artificial intelligence is really just, your ability to use technology, use the machine to help you to do things maybe faster, better, etc., than you've been able to hitherto. I think what's been interesting about generative AI, albeit it's, by the way, not an overnight sensation either, is it's a set of large language models that really kind of burst on the scene, if you like, or at least have a common origin in some of the Google Transformer models that were published back in sort of 2017 timeframe. And what turned out is effectively what was built as a translation model, right, predicting what word was going to come next and solving some of the problems around word order differences in different languages, is it turned out that same mathematical structure, which is essentially probability-based prediction, can be used for many, many different problems, whether that's biological, molecular sequencing, whether it's computer vision, and probably also generating the many poems that people have sent to each other as a result of using some of this tooling. And all of the kind of generative AI models that are in use today, whether you're a major company, a major technology provider, right through to the startups, basically have that heart in common. Partly because they're built by a small sort of closely connected group of people. What's been fascinating, I think, is over the last couple of months is just the pace of advancement in this tooling. So even just 3 or 4 months ago, we were all sort of musing at how GPT-3 was getting lots of things wrong, the hallucinations that we talked about. And now you look at the almost human level performance that GPT-4 is able to produce, that is able to span essay writing to coding to better computer vision, taking law exams, psychology, protein folding, you name it. And I think that's just been the real acceleration within this.
And so we've talked about ChatGPT, which I think has gotten the most attention on the subject. But the generative capabilities can apply to audio, video, across a whole wide range of spaces. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. And, I think particularly in how to create new content, it's becoming really exciting in that space. Anything from marketing messages and press releases, right, sort of text creation, through to image generation. Design me a new packaging for this product.
Yes.
Even entire creative outputs, whether that's artwork, writing of songs, writing of books, and so on. So very wide application of this that is true kind of creative content.
And we're going to briefly delve into the legal area because it's going to come up. So there's obviously legal issues in terms of ownership of content generated by generative AI. Has that conversation come up with clients you're working with? Where's the conversation going on that?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, one of the, I don't know if I can say this as a downside, I'm not sure it is yet, but certainly one of the outcomes of the technology moving so fast is that actually the legal, regulatory, ethics almost frameworks have not moved as fast as the technology is moving. And now, on one level, there is a sort of group that will be panicked by that and say, "Gosh, we need to shut this all down. It's moving too fast." What I'm seeing with the conversations that I'm having with clients, every day, is actually what generative AI is doing is it's shining a spotlight on issues that were already there, right? Model bias, model explainability, what level of data we should really be pulling into products, and where is the bar on responsible product management, not just I'm going to pull everything in. Those issues have existed through product management and for like normal AI already. What generative AI is doing is it's shining light onto that. And from my perspective, that's a great thing. because it means that companies are having the discussions around this that in all fairness, they should have been having, over the last couple of years, but maybe it wasn't bubbling up in as, real and visceral a way. And so I think, there are justifiable concerns that some of this technology advancement is outpacing some of these frameworks. I think the crux here is making sure that we're using this as a moment in time to have those discussions around, how should we be thinking about this? So maybe I'm an eternal optimist on these things, but I see it as a generative AI as a force for good in shining a light on the need for these conversations. But that need isn't a new one.
And another way to think about it is that we've never been able to stall the progress of technology. It's not as if we have the option to just say, well, all the work that's been done around the math and so on around the field, let's just stop the work. It's never going to stop. So it's a question of how do we responsibly let it develop as opposed to trying to stop something that can't be stopped.
I think that's absolutely well put. And, I think and I hope that generative AI, at least in the glass half full view, will prove to be an accelerator for some of these risk discussions that we're already brewing, from data privacy to cybersecurity to bias risk, job displacement, as we talked about earlier, IP protection, as well as things like geopolitical concerns around it as well. So these risks aren't unique to generative AI, but it does put them further in the spotlight. And as I say, with glass half full, my hope is that means that we do discuss them and we do run them to ground in a responsible way.
Yes, I remember when Netscape Navigator first IP'd out, I think it was 1994 or something like that. Nobody could have predicted how wide-ranging the changes brought about by the internet and e-commerce would be. And while many people are scared about the birth of AI, in some ways I'm very happy to be around during the birth of AI, because it's going to be really exciting to see the changes that come about in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the possibilities? If people took that mindset to say, we're about to catch a big wave, how do we ride this wave in the best possible way? To me, it's more excitement than fear that should be the conversation here.
Yes, I love that. And I was having a conversation with someone the other day who said, many of the folks that they're talking to are stuck somewhere between FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt, and FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. And actually, neither of those ends of the spectrum are particularly helpful, right? If I'm in fear, uncertainty, doubt, I can't move. I do nothing. Yes. And if I'm in FOMO, possibly I move too fast without really understanding how this is going to change the nature of my business models, etc. Yes. So I'm hoping that the dialogue around this gets us somewhere, maybe not in the middle, maybe it's closer to FOMO than it is to FUD. But, I really think that there are those camps today. And, we shouldn't forget that neither of them are particularly productive. But from my glass half full perspective, I just think this is a really fascinating time to not just live through, but to shape, right? This is, our gift to be able to shape this era and to hopefully get it right. But the level of promise, the level of possibility that AI and generative AI within that can create, if you just look at anything from medical advancement, right, R&D on drug discovery and so on, through to just how it will make all of our lives easier and better in the way that we, engage with brands, engage with, needs in our own lives. I mean, the promise and possibility is huge. So I truly hope that, more and more companies will start to embrace what this can really mean that will help us as consumers. But at the same time, making sure that they're spending the time to do it responsibly, to do it while generating what I would call real digital trust in the equation as well.
Yes, I remember speaking to the CEO of a large insurance company, and he was very concerned that they're being left behind the curve by their competitors around the integration and use of AI. And one of the things I pointed out to him is that the first 10 search engine companies are no longer around today. You don't have to be first as long as you do it smartly.
Exactly. And as long as you move fast.
Fast, right? But don't panic about it.
Exactly. I think it's well said. Good advice.
Kate, thank you so much. That was such a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I think our audience is going to love it as well.
Wonderful. Well, I hope it's helpful.
Is there anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I think we've covered a lot, I guess.
I think we've covered a lot. We've left some homework for the lawyers at the end, so that's good.
Yes, exactly.
Kate, thank you again. We'll be in touch, and we look forward to having you on the show again in the future.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Really lovely talking to you.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye-bye.